Hello everyone, Luke here, and after the awesomeness of last week's chapter, we're about to dive right into this. Now, I have a lot to say. With regards to this chapter, and you could basically view both these chapters like a two-part chapter because this chapter picks up immediately after the last one ended off. So, without further ado, let's just get right into this one. Okay, so this will be chapter 186, titled To Each Their Own Blade. And yeah, it's to each his own blade, except if you're Stanley and you're going to like shoot that blade out of the person's hand. But yeah, first of all, I want to talk about the awesomeness that is this colour spread here, which features Stanley and Ginru. Now, Ginru does play a prominent role in this chapter, and it's nice that we're getting more moments like him kind of like coming out of his sleaziness and becoming more of like the MVP as the arcs go on. Although there is one thing I want to say about this, aside from how gorgeous Stanley looks. Now, I'm not gay, but for Stanley I'd probably go gay for him. But I want to talk about this little thing right here. Notice that Stanley's dog tags. Yeah, there's a little Xenu there. Yeah, now obviously I've made like references in the past that Stanley could be gay for Xenu, but come on, this is just hammering in more and more how much Stanley cares about Xenu in a romantic way. Like, why else would he have a dog? Why else would he have like a chibi Xenu on a dog tag? But yeah, pretty awesome colour page. Probably one of the very few that doesn't have Senku on it, which is very rare because most of the colour pages do have Senku on it in some form or another. Actually, the ones that we haven't seen Senku on are the ones that actually involve Stanley, so it's pretty unique in that regard. And I love colour pages like this, showing off Boichi's fantastic art. And another thing that's showing off his fantastic art is the opening pages, because we get panels quite like that as well, where it has like multiple character reactions. Like not really panels that Boichi tends to go with in this series. So it's kind of unique and interesting in that regard. But anyway, it picks up immediately after the ending of the last chapter with Stanley finding Suika and after saving Shana and going freeze as she is freaking out, saying Stanley spotted me. And of course, Suika, Matsukaze, and Ginru do not understand the significance of the word freeze because they're obviously from the primitive age, so they have no custom of like what double meanings of words actually mean. So Matsukaze goes off the notion that it probably means freeze is to turn the water to ice, which means he's not wrong. That is actually what it means. But of course, that's not what Stanley's forces are actually referring to. And before Suika actually can figure out like what's going on here, like she's just confused as Ginru and Matsukaze. And she's like, I don't know what this means, but I can't let them catch me. And we see her speeding off at lightning speed to try and get away from Stanley's forces. And of course, Francois, being from the modern times, knows exactly what Stanley was actually trying to get at here. She goes, "What a grave state of affairs. Master Suika, Ginru, and Matsukaze lack 21st century knowledge and have no inkling to what the phrase freeze actually means," as we see Stanley's forces trying to get back at Suika and blast her to a pole, which was pretty intense when I first saw this chapter. I was thinking like, God damn it, 2 times in the same arc that Suika is on the verge of pretty close to actually dying here, and it got me really intense. But of course, Francois, being ever more resourceful, grabs the dagger, as we see again Suika just trying to sip away from them. Again, incredible feat on Suika's part, like just seeing how fast she is and just sipping around this area, trying to navigate away from Stanley's forces. Francois goes on to say, the only makeshift weapon on hand is the small paring knife, and she doesn't possess any combat skills. There's little sense deploying the knife unless it's quite literally do or die, which in this case it actually is, because Suika and her are going to get gunned down. And I love this from Francois because she's been one of those characters that I really liked in like characterization and mainly personality Francis, but to see her here being ever more resourcefulness and looking out for her teammates. Like, just shows kind of character she actually is. And it's interesting because this is the first time we've actually seen Francois away from Ryusui. Obviously when they're not petrified, but when they're actually unpetrified, it's the first time we've actually seen them away from each for quite an extensive period of time. As Francois throws the knife, we see Stanley's forces getting ready to shoot Suika, and her getting completely, for lack of a better word, petrified by this sight. Matsukaze sees the knife and is thinking that, and they're thinking the first to react to the knife dancing through the airwaves is Matsukaze, and there's no mere stroke of luck. It's his war against the petrification devices. Matsukaze has risked his life trying to instinctively react to projectiles, and of course Matsukaze, being Matsukaze, immediately reacts to this as we see him kicking one of Stanley's forces, and quite impressively through the air being able to grab the knife as he's able to untie both as he's able to untie just Ginryu at this moment in time, and leaving it all up to Ginryu. So pretty good that they're all actually playing a part in getting out of this situation, or should I say getting out of this situation from Stanley. But they're each showing what they're capable of and how they're able to handle a situation without having Senku there to back them up. And yeah, that's quite interesting that this is one of the first times that groups of the Kingdom of Science team that are part of the main cast have actually gone off and done something without Senku being there. That's actually do or die situation, and not with the other members of the main group. But anyway, another interesting paneling here that that Boichi is working with here. This kind of paneling here, again, it's something that he's not really used to actually doing. So it's pretty interesting how he's doing various different panel layouts. Not something I'm a big fan of, these types of panels, but again, it's very opportunity. It's nice to see him stretching his goals, stretching his talents. Yeah, that was the word I was looking for. Anyway, Matsukaze leaves it up to Ginryu, and Ginryu goes on to say, "You dummy, Matsukaze, I can't fight back against guns. But wait, at this distance, if it means giving Suika a second to get away, maybe I can." As Matsukaze thinks back on his own lord, and we see Stanley's forces getting ready more to fire at Suika before we see Ginryu actually attacking Stanley's forces in order to try and give Suika the advantage to get away. As he goes, "I cannot let Suika die." And like I said, Ginryu, he's one of those characters who can be a bit of a sleazeball, but when push comes to shove, he is actually one of the ones that is capable of doing these things. As he says, how I forget, I started out as fish guard, and I am actually kind of strong after all that training, which, yeah, you can't argue with that. And it's interesting because we get another situation where Suika and Ginryu are actually teaming up together, because if you remember back on Treasure, they were the ones who were tasked to getting the science lab from the boat from Ibara, and it was like Suika's bravery that was actually encouraging Ginryu in that regard. Same thing here, how her bravery against Stanley's forces, who have guns that could easily kill her at any moment, it is kind of like irking him on to actually, no, just do something, man. Oh, and one last thing before I actually move on to talking about the next panels is that in those panels we get Matsukaze looking at Ginryu, and they have a look to each other as they're both thinking about it on two times. One time when Matsukaze sacrificed himself for his lord, and going, "My lord was strong far to the very end of the earth," and Ginryu's flashing back to the time when he first met Matsukaze and going, "Yeah, you got the wrong guy. I'm kind of a sleazeball in that regard." And it's kind of like him thinking back on him saying he's a sleazeball. It's like, no, I have to prove myself here. I have to save Suika, and I can't let her die because she's doing so much for me. So it's kind of noble on Ginryu's part, and it's kind of like redeeming his character a little bit. And I love those subtle moments that have actually been put in for his character. And hey, who knows? He might actually be the MVP of this arc. We never know. But anyway, going back to what we've just said, even though Ginryu is actually being incredibly brave here and taking on Stanley's forces, he's no match for Stanley, as Stanley proceeds to shoot at Ginryu and destroy the stick that he was using to escape Stanley's forces and to try and attack to stop them attacking Suika. But funny enough, he destroys the stick, but he doesn't fire directly at Ginryu. Now keep that in mind because that's going to come up in a little bit. And as we see him being tied up again, we see Stanley pointing at Suika. Again, Stanley's not fucking around here, which makes him even more terrifying than Xinu and Ibara as an antagonist. But of course, what makes him even more terrifying is the notion that Francois comes to here. As strong and skilled as Mr. Stanley is, he paused for a bit instead of shooting Master Ginryu instantly, and this gets her confused. Like, why would he pause? He could have easily shot Master Ginryu before that little scuffle, but he didn't. And she can only come to the conclusion that it's not that he couldn't shoot, but rather until the prisoners of war engaged in combat, he chose not to shoot. Now, this is very interesting because it's given us a little bit of insight into Stanley as a character, in the sense that he's not a character that is just a cold-blooded murderer. He's one that's like, okay, I have a moral compass here. These guys are my prisoners. I'm not going to attack them, and I'm going to use them as bait to try and get Xinu back. But if they try to attack me, then all gloves are off. And I feel like that's kind of like what's going on with his character, in the sense with Suika and Francois. Like, they're like, Suika was told to freeze, and if she had froze, maybe she wouldn't have been threatened to be shot right now. But of course, they took it as like, oh, she's resisting arrest, rather than not realising that she actually doesn't understand the notion of the word freeze. And that's kind of like gotten them thinking. But at the same time, he's not. I don't think Stanley is very keen on shooting not just a child, but also. Not just a child. I don't know what was going at it. No, not just a civilian, but a child as well. And this is going to come into play in a little bit. Francois goes on to say, in fact, I observed that Master Ginryu and Matsukasu were only bounded, but not in harm's way. They're prisoners of war who are being treated in accordance with those rules, more or less. Now, one thing I do want to bring up here is what Party Jam said on Discord. If I can bring it up. Come on, Discord. Okay, we're gonna get it here. Let's see, go down to the Stone page. He brought up what Xinu said in the last chapter, where what you need to know about Stanley is that in order to rescue his general, he will not hesitate to slaughter everyone. Ethical moral don't come into play, because this is simply his job as a soldier. Now, the way me and David kind of interpret that as like, oh, this is Xinu kind of thinking about it as like a guerrilla combat, whereas Stanley's thinking of more of Stan, like he has a standard here. And that's going to be interesting, because Xinu has kind of seen Stanley as like, oh, he's this guy of guerrilla warfare. He doesn't care about who gets his way. He will shoot them whether or not the civilian or an enemy target. But Stanley actually has a moral compass, kind of like Phylomax from Power Rangers, because Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, because Phylomax's quarrel was with the Rangers, not with any of the civilians. So this is kind of the vibe I'm getting from Stanley here, which makes him a much more fascinating and deeper layered character, makes him a little bit more complex, but also at the same time makes him a much more threatening villain than Xinu or Ibara, because he's kind of like a villain you can sort of like reason with, or kind of see, kind of like understand where he's coming from. Like, he wants to get his general back, Xinu, but at the same time, it's kind of like, how is he going to get that back without the risk of who's a civilian and who's kind of like attacking him? Because if they were part of the fighting force, then he probably wouldn't have hesitated to shoot them on sight. But also as well, if you notice back on everything that Stanley's done, he's not been directly aiming to shoot to kill at this point, because I don't think it's something that because Xenu was the one who was saying shoot Senku, and once he thought Senku was dead, that was it. He left, and throughout this arc, you've seen him, and throughout the ending of the last arc, you've seen him kind of not. He's kind of been more shooting to wound rather than shooting to kill, because he shot Matsukaze and Mozu in the shoulders at one point, and he shot Tsukasa and Hyoga in the shoulders. But he could have easily shot to kill them if he truly wanted to. And now that we're thinking back on it, that's kind of like, oh yeah, he hasn't really been shooting to kill. Now that we think about it, he's been more like shooting to wound, so that he can take Xenu back from him. But anyway. This is, and I said this is going to be interesting to see when Xenu finds out, like, oh, Stanley's not been shooting to kill like I initially thought. That's going to be an interesting dynamic that they're going to have to come to terms with when they actually do reunite with each other. And PyJump said this on Discord just now. I think some of us were wondering if there would be a wedge between Stanley and Xenu. Perhaps this is it right here, differences in standards of war and soldier responsibility. And I can agree with that. That kind of like will be the wedge between Stanley and Xenu. Like, Xenu was kind of like, oh, Stanley, you're my war veteran, you're going to shoot them on sight no matter what. And he's kind of like, no, I'm not going to shoot those civilians there. What are you talking about, Xenu? I'm not a killer. And Xenu would be like, what? But you were like someone who would shoot to kill. Yeah, I'm only shooting to kill who you want because you're my general. I'm not going to shoot these innocent civilians and these and for the if I remind you, you want me to kill Senku because he conflicts with your ideology. These guys, they have no beef with us, so why are we killing them? And that would be an interesting dynamic to see them come to terms with each other of that disagreement, because they haven't really disagreed on anything, and it'll be interesting to see a disagreement come between those two and how they come about it. Anyway, thank you for that, Party Jams, for me and giving me something to respond with that comment. Continuing on, Francois goes on to say that these people aren't cold-blooded murderers, they're soldiers, which means and of course, before Stanley pulls the trigger, Francois comes down and says, we're civilians. Master Suika here is a civilian doctor, and she's fulfilling her obligation as a doctor by treating a passerby suffering from a spider bite. For safety's sake, she's been living out here away from Master Senku and the others. If you doubt me, you're welcome to inspect her belongings. As Suika's thinking to herself and saying, yeah, it's not really a lie exactly. And Francois, ever so faithful servant to Ryusui, goes on to say, we are unaffiliated with the combat unit. We have no intention of attacking, and will do as you say. Knowing that, will you still execute us? And Stanley, ever more complex, and again, it's just making him so much more fascinating. Actually, this chapter has put him in my top 5 villains, just specifically on this chapter alone, because getting more deeper layers to his character and going, nope, we'll not suit you if what you're saying is true. So again, he's willing to step back and be like, okay, if this person is giving themselves up to me, then there's no point in killing them. And I love that about villains, how they can just be like, okay, we're not just cold-blooded murderers here. We'll hear them out and see what they're going to go do, and then take it from there. As Maya catches Suika and ties her up, and of course ties Francois up, Suika is feeling a little bit downhearted that it's because of her actions that she thinks the mission was a failure, and that they couldn't tell everyone that Stanley was on his way. And I love that about her. I love that little moment there from Suika, because again, just adding more to her character, that she's kind of one of those characters that wants to be useful, but when something doesn't go wrong and she's partly responsible for that, she'll take all the blame on herself. Like, for example, when she was first introduced and they were pumping the iron into the first to get heated up, and she was the first one to collapse, she felt herself worthless because of that. Like, she wanted to help, and the fact that she's the one tagging out first, like, all that guilt has been brought on her, like, it's all my fault. And it's the same thing here, the fact that because of her actions, like, their part in the mission kind of failed, and she's kind of taking the brunt of that blame, like a lot of that blame. And I feel like this is probably going to come into play and have a little mini arc for her character, how if when we get to like Math City or Rubber City or Alunian City, she might actually be like, Senku might actually give her an important task, and she'd probably be thinking back on this moment. It's like, what if I fail again? What if I fail again? And that will be something. That will be something that will be really interesting for her character to kind of like this moment doesn't go away for her. And she's kind of like worrying all the time now. Like, what if I do something useless? What if I do something worthless? What if I do something bad? What if everything's all my fault? And they're kind of like getting all that psychological torment from having a gun pointed at her head as well. That's kind of like gonna give her some like trauma that's probably not gonna go away for a long time. And I'll be interested to see what Boichi and Inagaki take away from just this one moment in this chapter. Francois tries to reassure her that it's not necessarily a bad thing that this failed Suika. In fact, I'd say we rendered this distinguished service, but of course Suika is probably not listening at this point. It's probably thinking like, it's all my fault. This is all my fault. This is all my fault. Before we get to see Mr. Radar, who we finally after like 13 chapters of just calling him Mr. Radar, we finally get his name, and his name is Leonard. So Leonard. So I'm just gonna call him Leon for short, because yeah, he has Leon. So Leon is how I'm going to refer to him from now on, Mr. Radar. So Leon jumps up into a tree, and Maya questions what he's actually doing. As he goes on to say, just before we nabbed them, the one called Francois set out a transmission, and Francois doesn't deny this. She goes on to say, if that troubles you, you may verify the Morse code conducts yourself. We split into two teams. That's the message I sent back to the I sent to the US base just as a precaution. So obviously she's lying about who she actually sent to, and of course Stanley being Stanley, he's like, yeah, this seems a little bit fishy. Did she actually send it back to the US people, or did she send it back to Senku? And you get the eyes from Stanley like thinking like, yeah, this is clearly BS that she's doing here. I mean, she's not lying. She did say she did send something back to her allies, but are they the allies that are in? Are they the allies in North America or South America? As we cut back to the Fort Medusa, and Karaku is freaking out, saying, did something happen to Suiko and Francois? And Senku confirms that they had a run-in with Stanley's gang, and they go on to say, Francois willingly gave the position to the enemy just to send a message. But of course, Senku being Senku says, you got it backwards. What Francois did is give them the enemy position. As we see Chelsea making out a roadmap and saying, that's an easy puzzle considering the bare factor in how long it's been since those two set out. And yep, we found them first. Now we know the enemy's location, and that's where the chapter ends. So, whoa, pretty big chapter. A lot of action in this chapter. Which, as we know, Dr. Stone's not really the best when it comes to action. But my God, this action was intense, and it was a tense situation for Suika here. Now, I have no idea what the plan's going to be now. Whether they've got a Medusa working, and they're going to send Karaku out to petrify Stanley's crew, and they're going to have to be like, okay, a backup plan here. Stanley's crew, along with Matsukaze, Ginru, Suika, and Francois, they're the ones that are going to be petrified, and then we're gonna unpetrify them. So that's all I can say in this chapter, and because it mainly focused more on Suika, Francois, Ginru, and Matsukaze's fight against Stanley's forces, which was pretty intense, like I said, and I really enjoyed it. And now it seems like we're moving into like the second stage of the final battle. Again, I feel like this is gonna go on for a little bit longer. I feel like it's gonna end at chapter 200. I could see this arc ending at chapter 200. So yeah, that's all I've got to say on this chapter. It was, like I said, it was more focused on the action, but we got some great character development and characterization from all parties: Stanley's parties, Francois and Suika's party. Yeah, so it was a good chapter all around. Really enjoyed it. But what did you guys think of this chapter? Let me know. Like, subscribe, comment, all that jazz. And this will be Lashaluk signing off. Later, guys.